And welcome everybody to the 18th episode of the hashtag Invest This podcast. This is your host, Scott Bauer, and today I have Todd Dexheimer with me out of the Twin Cities, Minnesota, focused on multifamily. And Todd, why don't you go ahead and give the listeners a little bit more about your background and more about what you're focused on now?
Yeah, absolutely. So, bit about my background. I used to be a high school industrial tech teacher. So I was teaching our future children, future leaders, how to how to do welding and how to woodworking and all that kind of stuff. So that was 2008. Then I started to, just get to 2007. Really, I started to get curious. I knew that teaching wasn't really going to be for me for long term. So I started reading and really got intrigued into real estate. So I started investing in real estate starting in 2008. So right when the whole world collapsed, I jumped in both feet, and I ended up buying 3 properties all within a week or two period of time. I bought a house to live in for my wife and I. It was a foreclosure, and we needed to do a major renovation on that while we were living in it. Then I bought a rental house, and I also bought a house to flip with a partner. So I jumped in with both feet and never looked back. Since then, I've bought a lot of properties. I did around 150-ish flips, 150 flips. And then also built up a portfolio. I think it was around like 75 or so units. I've since sold some. So I think right now I'm around 50. And then 2016, I transitioned I stopped doing the flips. I stopped buying the single family or 1 to 4 unit rentals. And now I'm buying solely apartment buildings. So since 2016, I've been buying mid-size apartment buildings. My smallest one is 10 units. My largest one is 84 units, and I've got 120 under contract. So that's what I got going on now, multifamily, and then doing syndication as well to get those purchased.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds awesome. And actually, I have quite a few questions up to this point because right off the bat, industrial tech teacher, I remember being in high school in industrial tech, and gosh, what a shift. I mean, and that kind of leads me to my next question. I mean, you're an industrial tech teacher. I know you weren't making a ton of money. So how did you find capital, especially in a downturn market like '08, to be able to buy 3 houses? Or was it something where you just had it saved up for a while, or did you leverage your relationships with other people? Take us through that for a little bit.
Yeah, so a little bit of both. I'm very frugal by nature and still am. We don't spend a lot of money, my wife and I. So at the time, I was making whatever 27,000 or whatever it was, and my wife had a yeah.
That's just insane.
Isn't it sad? That's what teachers make, man. It is sad. So then my wife she was working full time, so she was making some money, but we still had student loans and that kind of stuff. So we had been able to save up about $30,000, somewhere around there, 20, 25, $30,000. And so that was able to get our first, or actually it was our second house. We had a house that we sold. Luckily, we sold it perfect time. We sold it in 2007 and then rented for a year. So it was perfect timing. We were able to get out of it whole. We didn't lose any money. We didn't make any money. But anyway, so we bought this first house with an FHA 203K loan, which allowed us to get into it for only, around $3,000 or $4,000. And then we were able to buy this rental property, bought it for $60,000, put another, 15 or so, 20,000 into it. And that was all of our money. So then the third property that I flipped, I ended up partnering with somebody who I thought had the money, and he ended up not having the money, but he did know people that had money. So he was able to get us the money to buy that property to do the flip. So it was kind of a combination just of savings and of bringing in my first partner for a deal, and that's kind of how I ran the business. Then from there on, I brought in a lot of partners to do deals, to do the flips, to do the rentals, and just continue to roll. With a lot of the rentals, I was able to refinance and roll too. So that's kind of how I continued. After that first one, I actually met a banker and he said, "Hey, why don't you refinance that property?" I didn't think that was possible because it was 2008. The world had ended. And everybody that was intelligent told you couldn't get a loan from a bank. Well, that was
Hmm.
just a complete lie. I mean, you could get loans from banks. They were out there. And I figured that out after a while, that there was still banks that were hungry and wanted to do business. You just had to stop listening to people.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure that at that time, although the general public and everybody was thinking that the bottom had fallen out and there was no money in the market, the banks and other smart people were probably still seeing, hey, this is a huge opportunity to capitalize on a down market, right? Because everybody knows that during a down market is really the optimal time to buy opportunities, right? I mean, because you can get great deals. Where, as in times like we are now, where there's lots of money circulating throughout the market, and it's very, I wouldn't say easy to get a loan because that's not true, but there's just a lot more options for lending out there. That causes prices of properties to go up, and when everybody else is buying stuff, it's probably not your time to be buying. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've got to, when everybody else is buying, you've got to be really disciplined and make sure that what you're buying is actually an asset, not a liability. Um, yeah, but I mean, back then, so the Twin Cities is we've got a lot of small banks, a very large amount of small banks. We don't have a lot of big banks. We have Wells Fargo, US Bank, and that's really it. We've got some medium-sized banks like Associated and Bremer, but then we've got the rest of it in TCF. The rest of them are small banks. And so, I called several hundred banks in the Twin Cities to try to get loans, and most of them said I was crazy. So it's not like, yeah, lending was easy. It definitely wasn't, but there were still banks that were wanted to lend. The banks that actually that got it, that had somebody that or had the right people in place and in charge that said, "Geez, this is a golden opportunity." I mean, properties are when you can buy a property for $60,000 and rent it for $1,400 a month. Right? It makes sense all day. It doesn't matter what's happening out in the world. It just makes so much sense. And these banks that understood it, they made a lot of money during that time.
Yeah, that makes sense. 100%. So you got some banks to be on your side. And let's fast forward a little bit. You bought some single family houses. You flipped 100 to 150 single family homes, put some cash in your pocket. And then when did you make that switch where you said, okay, now it's time. I'm going to go and start buying, 1 to 4 families, or was that all kind of in the same time?
So I was buying 1 to 4 family from the start. And the only reason I started flipping was to be able to buy more 1 to 4 family because I ran out of money.
Hmm.
And I kind of got caught into the flipping game and really got distracted by flipping. My ultimate goal was always to buy multifamily, large multifamily, and the flips and the small, 1 to 4 family kind of got me distracted and held that progress back, and that was my fault. But not so. In 2016, I transitioned into larger multifamily. I still wouldn't call it large because right now I'm buying 75 to 150 unit buildings.
Well, it's all in perspective, right? I mean, if you're used to just buying single family houses, now all of a sudden 75 unit
Right,
complex is pretty big, right?
yeah, absolutely. It is, it's bigger than, obviously, like you said, it's all in perspective. It's bigger than a 1 to 4 family. Uh, my next building, once I finally said I'm gonna buy multifamily, was a 22 unit building, and that's relatively small, but it's much bigger than a fourplex.
Mm-hmm. 100%. So when you were buying the 1 to 4 family units, I mean, how were you pricing those out, or how were you figuring out? Was it a return standpoint? Because you had said that you're buying rentals, right? So were you just fixing them up a little bit and putting renters in there, or what type of returns were you trying to find?
So I looked at it a couple different ways. The returns, uh, the returns were just astronomical. So I wasn't really looking at the returns. I was looking at a couple of things. I was looking at, like, I just had my standards. Could I make this a month? So on a single family, could I make at least $300 a month after all my expenses? I'm talking like real expenses and reserves, real reserves. For a duplex, it needed to be 400, and for a triplex, it needed to be 500, and for a fourplex, it needed to be 600. And so those were my standards. But then my also had is I had to be able to buy it, renovate it, rent it, and then refinance it and pull at least 95% of my money back out of it, if not 100%.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That certainly
So
makes
that's
sense.
why I said my returns were astronomical, because I would pull, let's say 95 to 100% out. Well, if you got only 5% of, $100,000, you've got, $5,000 out of your pocket. Well, the
Yeah,
return, the
you can
return is
handle
crazy. Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So I just had that minimum, profit margin.
And that was back in when 2000 up until 2015. Is that when that?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Up until I think my last, 1 to 4 unit was purchased in about 2015.
Okay. So 2015 comes, and I mean, here in the Phoenix market, really 2012 was kind of the turnaround, but 2015 for sure
Oh
was
yeah.
when things really started to pick up. Was that similar in the Twin Cities?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was hard to find a deal in 2015 that worked for a rental.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I found two in 2015 that worked for a rental. I flipped a few others. My last flip, I think, phased out in 2016. But yeah, it was really hard to find good properties even in 2015. So I mean, we're already 3 years past that, and I don't know how people are finding anything that works.
Yeah, yeah, and I hear that so often, but I think it's in your marketing strategy because there's certainly
It is
deals
for
out there.
sure. For
I
sure.
find
Yeah,
deals
yeah.
every day, but
And part of it is that exactly. I stopped marketing. I stopped
hmm
trying because that's not where I wanted to focus. So it definitely is. It would have to be a different strategy than I left off with.
sure. So then that transitions us into you made the decision. You know what? I'm done with the 1 to 4 families. Time to go bigger. What
Yep.
was that? What happened next?
Yeah. So I mean, that transition happened uh, for a couple of reasons. One is because I wanted to. Two was because the market made me start thinking that way. And three, probably most importantly, is I split up with my business partner, who I'd been doing a lot of flips with,
Okay.
and said, "This is where I'm going." I went and I looked at my portfolio. I looked at my rental portfolio versus my flips, and said, "My goodness, these rentals are blowing the pants out of my flips as far as returns. What am I doing flipping houses?" And there's so much head damage with flipping. I don't know if you flip or not, but there's just so much head damage with flipping that it's like, I'm going, why am I doing this when I can just buy more rental properties? So that's kind of why I switched, and I decided um, out of state made a lot of sense, because in state in Minneapolis, it's very difficult to buy properties and to do a value add like I like to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I started focusing on out of state, and I still look at in state, but it's I can't find anything that's been working. So I started looking for emerging markets.
And then that took you outside of the Twin Cities, and I
Yeah,
guess
so Twin Cities is a great market. It's just a couple things didn't work in the Twin Cities. There's two things in particular that I had a hard time with in the Twin Cities. One was the rent affordability, and our tenants are paying about 38, I think, percent of their income goes to rent. I wanted it 30% or less. The other thing was opportunity to flip. Oh, sorry, not flip. Opportunity to renovate and to raise rents and all that kind of stuff. our market, I'd say, is fairly savvy, where most of the owners they understand where it's at, and we don't skyrocket. Our rents don't skyrocket. They go up that like 1 to 3%. So landlords generally stay with the market. So there's usually not a ton of, you might be able to add 50, or you might even be able to squeeze in 100 extra on rent, but you're probably going to have to put a decent amount of work into it.
Sure.
And then our C-class properties are selling for 6.5 cap. So it's kind of hard to make the numbers work.
So, I mean, when you're going to tackle these opportunities, are you really looking for kind of a longer term play? How long are you in these deals?
So I look at a 5 to 8 year hold. So it's a medium length hold. I always do look at what it would look like if we held it for even longer. But so I'm bringing in investors. So I'm doing syndications. Most of them want to see their money come back to them eventually. So they're looking at that 5 to 8 years is a good mark for most investors.
Okay. That certainly makes sense. And do you have I'm sure you're always looking for different investors or new investors to bring into your deals. Are most of them okay with the 5 to 8 year hold?
If they're not, then that's too bad, because that's what we do. So that's our program. And I some people want it quicker. Some people, hang on one second. I'll come back to that. Give me a sec.
Okay.
Really? What? You got all the parts for this?
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah. They're in my bathroom. If you go into my bathroom.
This is one you want to use, though?
Why not?
You don't want to use something else?
Yep. No problem. Totally understand. So, how many units are up to now?
Boy, I don't know. I don't count. Like 250-ish or so, 300, somewhere around there.
Okay.
I guess I'd have to look and count. I don't really count. So.
Okay. So where do you go from here? I mean, kind of now that you've made the decision, you went from single family or 1 to 4 units into starting to buy bigger units with investors and syndication. And now we're in 2018. A couple of questions. Where do you think you're going to go from here? And what do you think the markets are telling you should do from here?
Those are tough questions. First of all, where do I go from here? My goal is to, obtain about 200 million worth of real estate within the next, now 9 years. I would like to I was reading a book with Sam Zell's book, Am I Being Too Subtle? And I looked, and he's got like a net worth of $5 billion. And I said, that sounds good. I'd like to be there. So my goal is, before I die, to get, a pretty healthy net worth. And the reason being is not necessarily because I want to be this rich person, because I want to be able to affect millions of people in a positive way. And so the more money I can accumulate, there's 2 things. The more money I can accumulate, the more people I can affect, because I'm going to be hiring them. I'm going to be, positively renovating their apartments or commercial spaces. I'm going to be employing them as far as like their contractors and stuff like that. And then also, if I've got a good amount of money, I'm able to then give back, right? I'm able to give that money back. I'm able to start foundations and stuff like that. So it's not necessarily just because I want to be this uber wealthy, rich person. It's because I want to make a positive impact.
Thank you for answering that, because that was actually going to be my question. I mean, what is the point? Why do you want to have that? And I think you nailed it on the nose. Because being very wealthy you don't just want to be that wealthy guy. You want to have, wealth gives you options, and that gives you opportunities that not having wealth wouldn't give you, right?
Yeah. And it doesn't take a lot. And for people that aren't there, they might not understand this completely, but it doesn't take a lot to become financially independent or financially free or whatever you want to call it, where your income is basically coming in regardless. And so you can stop when you hit that point, right? And you can kick your feet up and relax and maybe put a few hours of work here and there to make sure it's maintained. But when I think about doing that, it just doesn't sound like anything I'd want to do. I
Mhm.
feel if I did that, I feel like I'm wasting my life and I'm wasting the talents I was given. So with that in mind, why don't I just kick ass? Sorry for swearing. And make it happen and affect people in a positive way.
Hey man, hats off to you. Yeah, that's the right attitude. That's the right way to look at it. I mean, yeah, kick ass, because I mean, why else are we here? And so if
Exactly.
you are able to kick ass, and then allow you to help other people do the same thing. So congrats on that. And I think that's a really good transition. Kind of as we're coming up on here on time, I'd like to take us into a lightning round. Are you ready for that?
I am.
Okay. What is your hashtag invest this tip to keep our listeners moving forward?
Um, I would say, be patient, especially right now in this market. Make sure you're patient and stay disciplined. Um, it's very easy for you to, you know, think you have to buy something now because everybody else is or everybody else did, and you want to, get to that next level. Just be
Hmm.
patient. Be patient. Stay disciplined.
Thank you for that. That's really, really important. Couldn't agree with you more, especially in a time like we're in right now where everybody's buying. It feels like you should be buying, but I would argue that that's actually not the case. So
Yeah.
thank you for that. Do you have a favorite book? Are you a big reader? And if you do, what is the impact it's had for you?
There's lots of books I love. I'll go with uh, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. That's probably one of my favorite books. And just there's so many lessons that he teaches you in that book. I think one of the biggest things is talking about basically being positive and keeping that mindset. Um, you know, not going around just being this negative downer, which is so easy to do in this world.
Oh
It's so
yeah.
easy to listen to the news. I don't watch the news anymore. I try not to, even when I'm on my computer, and a browser page pops up and it's got a news story. I just get out of it as quickly as I can. Cause I don't want to hear about all this stuff,
Yeah, I mean the mindset that you have and just the overall influence that you have around the people around you. If you're always negative, then that's the influence you have. However, on the flip side, if you change how you think and you fill your mind with positive thoughts instead, I'm a big believer in that you will have a positive life. I mean, I follow that same type of scenario myself, and How to Win Friends and Influence People is also one of my favorite books. It was something I read a long time ago, and I try to read it every year. I'd be lying if I said that I do, but it's just always there because of its impact. I mean, it's been around for a long time for a reason. So
Yeah, it's a book that you should read several times. I remember, if it's okay to tell something quick, I was on the airplane and I was reading the book and I got off the airplane and he was talking about how, when you just, your smile is basically contagious. And so I remember going into the gas station, there was this grumpy lady and she was working behind the counter. I looked at her and he talked about saying their name too. And I said, Jan or whatever her name was. I said, "Hey Jan, how are you doing? Is your day going well?" And I gave her this big smile. She looked up at me and she smiles and she goes, you know, "Thanks for asking me how my day is today." And it was just and then, we had a short little conversation and I left but it just made a difference in her day right there. You could just tell. And she just brightened up right away. And so it's fun when you do stuff like that.
yeah, and you just see that impact. So
Yeah.
definitely appreciate you sharing that story. Um, so as far as mentors go, or people that have given you advice, what is the best advice you've ever been given, and who gave that to you? I know it could be a tough question, but
Well, so this person is not my mentor, by the way, but the best advice I was given is everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And that is by Mike Tyson, who is not my mentor, but I love that quote because it's so true. You're going to get punched in the mouth, and you're going to get punched in the mouth a lot, and be prepared for it. And actually, you know what? You should want to be punched in the mouth. Not hopefully literally. But if you're not struggling, if you're not failing, if you're not, if you're not, kind of like wanting to give up here and there, then you're not growing.
That's huge. That is massive. And I totally agree. I mean, people don't want to get punched over and over and over and over and over again, but I think you make a very valid point. It's important to keep growing and to keep failing forward, so that you learn and pick yourself up. So thanks for sharing that. How do you like to give back? That's really important. I think to everybody. Is there something specific that you do to give back?
Yeah. So a few things. A lot of our charity money goes to our church. I also have give to various organizations. Then volunteering, I've been starting to volunteer for a group called Junior Achievement, which I enjoy. And then I also do, and I gotta get back to it because I haven't done it for a while. But I do just a food. We feed people in need, I guess, and serve them. So those are kind of what I've been doing, and always looking for other types of opportunities to get more involved. And
Yeah. Hey, those sound great. And I think when I ask this question, I get a lot of, always people feel like they have to necessarily go and give somewhere, or, either give back to children or junior achievement or the church or whatever. But I think that it's also to be able to give back to other, people in your circle or other people that are working with you on deals and stuff like that, so that you're because you're always kind of giving back, right? If you're sharing information, you're bringing people into your deals, this is giving back. It's a way. It's just a different type of giving back. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I do try to do that as much as I can. Obviously your time is limited, but yeah, for sure. I answer a lot of people's questions. I meet with a lot of people, and I'm happy to do that if I have time and if I can. And because people did that for me. And I quite frankly, I wish more people would have, and it's not necessarily because more people weren't, willing to. It's just because I didn't really ask.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think giving back, I'm on Bigger Pockets a lot of times. I'm trying to answer questions and be valuable there. And I have a podcast as well. And, that's trying to give back too. So
That's huge. That's definitely huge. Well, that leads me into my next question. How can the listeners reach you? If they have questions, they want to figure out where your podcast is at. What is your podcast, by the way?
yeah, podcast is called Pillars of Wealth Creation. They can, look it up on iTunes or Stitcher, SoundCloud, wherever they're listening to this. I'm sure they can find it, or they can just look up by my name, Todd Dexheimer. They can also go on to my webpage. Webpage is Venture D as in dog, or Dexheimer, properties.com. So it's venturedproperties.com. And they can shoot me an email. It's todd@venturedproperties.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. We'll make sure to put that in the show notes. And Todd, I appreciate you being here today, sharing kind of your story, transitioning from being a industrial tech teacher to now multi-unit, multi-family investor. I mean, that's huge, and really kind of the transition and how you went from one point to the next. And I'm excited to to stay in touch with you and see where this goes from here. Maybe have you on the show again later on and kind of give an update about where you're at. Would you be open to that?
Absolutely.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Well, thanks again for being here today. And we'll talk to you real soon.
Awesome. Have a great day too.
Okay. Talk soon. See you. Bye-bye.
Yep.